Let me start off. So some of you might be wondering who is actually this Generation Z, Z, whatever spelling you want to use. So I know it's Friday afternoon. I will not give you a big numerical exercise, but I just want you to think back to your birth year because that's one way in which we can define generations. So if you were born, let's say between 1946 to 1964, you will be a baby boomer. You are Generation X if you were born between 1965 to 1980. And if you were born between 1981 and the late 1990s, you are a millennial. And then finally, we come to the generation we talk about today, Generation Z or Z. These are those people who were born in the late 1990s up to the early 2010s. So, for Generation Z or Z, we are roughly, talking about people in their mid-teens to the late 20s. So I've given you the age brackets, and age brackets are really not the best way to measure generations, and you could also see they're very variable in terms of the length of age that I've given you. They're all very much related to the US history rather than reflecting the wider experiences in the world. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of unclear, boundaries between them. Most of all, there are an awful lot of stereotypes and assumptions about those generations that are very hard to generalize. So I don't want you to go away and think about that everyone in a generation is alike. What I want to offer you instead is, a definition of generations that focuses much more on the time they're coming of age. And this theory comes from a sociologist called Karl Mannheim. Karl Mannheim said that generations are really about shared social location rather than birth year. And by shared social location, what we mean is really the time when you grow up and come of age. That is really the shaping, the formative time in your life that will set you on the course for the rest of your life. So why is it that this generation seems particularly unhappy? What happened to them? Well, there are two key things that we can see about those generations. The first one is that they grow up in a time where they not only have one crisis, they have really many crises in short succession. We talk about polycrises, we talk about those things where you barely even recover from one crisis before the next one comes in. And then, the second thing that we see quite strongly is technology. And of course, I talk here about, the generative AI part in particular. But what I am particularly interested in is not, AI and what it can potentially do, but how it changes the perception of individuals. So now, if you're of this generation, you have technology at your fingertips, and it is interacting with you. So rather than Wikipedia, where you would have to read and you would have to acquire more knowledge, you now have an interactive relationship, an interactive learning with a machine. And this generation not only learns with those machines, they also develop relationships with those machines. They become their prime advisors. And when I'm teaching my students at King's College London, I do see that the first intuition of my students, who are all in this generation, is to go to their favorite tool, and they have built a relationship, and the technology knows what this is all about. So if you're thinking about generations, in particular this generation, what I want you to remember is not only birth years, but particularly what shaped them. And we have here multitude of crises as well as a technological shift.